Hey friend, please subscribe. 1 second for you. Big deal for me. I didn't expect it to end like this. If you had asked me a year ago where I thought I'd be today, I would have painted a picture of a happy, stable life. I would have said I had everything under control, like I always did. But sometimes, life doesn't wait for you to be ready. It just happens. I never really saw it coming. Not the way it all fell apart. I always thought that if anything ever went wrong, if something changed, I would notice. I would see the signs. But what I didn't know, what no one ever tells you, is that the biggest shifts in life don't always come with alarms or flashing lights. Sometimes they come quietly, and sometimes they come in the form of a simple statement. She's meeting her study partner tonight, my wife said one evening, as she grabbed her bag, her voice light and distracted. There was nothing particularly suspicious about it. We had been married for 8 years, and she'd always been the kind of person who was constantly bettering herself. Always studying, always learning, always working towards the next thing. I never thought much about the study partner she'd mentioned before. I had assumed it was a colleague from the art class she was taking, someone she worked with on group projects. At first, I didn't think it was strange. The timing seemed normal, even predictable. She had these late-night study sessions every now and then. I had my routine, she had hers. It was fine. In fact, it was comforting, familiar. But what bothered me wasn't her leaving. It was the way she left that night. The little things I hadn't noticed before. The way she avoided eye contact when she told me she was meeting him, the tightness in her voice when I asked her about how long she'd be gone. I had learned to pick up on subtle details over the years, and this was different. I never thought of myself as an overly suspicious person. I didn't spy on her. I didn't question her every move. But something about the way she said study partner felt off. It was as though there was an unspoken weight to it, a hidden meaning I wasn't privy to. The night stretched on, and I found myself tossing and turning in bed. I tried to read, tried to distract myself with the TV, but my mind kept drifting back to her words. Study partner. It didn't sit right with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. So I did something I never thought I would do. I got up, walked into the living room, and opened the drawer where she kept her phone. I told myself it was nothing, just curiosity. I wasn't snooping, not really. I was just confirming something. I glanced at her phone, scrolling through her messages. There it was. Texts between her and someone named Alex. At first, it seemed innocent enough, simple logistics about when and where they'd meet. But the more I read, the more my stomach twisted. Can't wait to see you tonight. One text read. I'll be thinking about you. It was one of those phrases that could be easily dismissed in the context of a friendship or a professional relationship. But something about the timing, the intimacy behind the words, it hit me like a slap in the face. I couldn't breathe. I scrolled further, my hands shaking, and found more. We're so good together, another text said. I don't want to wait anymore. And that was it. The thing that had been gnawing at me, the thing I couldn't explain, now it was all clear. The small, almost imperceptible shift that had started to grow between us, the space between us that had widened slowly over the last few months, was no longer just a feeling. It was real, but I didn't act immediately. No, I didn't rush into confrontation. I didn't storm into the room and demand answers. I wasn't like that. Instead, I took a step back, quietly thinking through everything. It was like I had suddenly stepped outside of myself and saw my own life from a distance. The house we had built together, the life we had created, the trust one thought we had. The more I thought about it, the more I realized something. I had been a fool. Not because I didn't know, but because I chose not to see. I had let my guard down. I had trusted her, blindly, without ever questioning anything. And now I was paying the price. When she came home that night, she didn't seem any different. There was no apology, no hesitation in her steps. She slipped into bed next to me, as though nothing had changed. But I knew better. The silence in the air between us was thick and suffocating, filled with everything we were no longer saying. I waited. I waited for her to tell me the truth, for her to own up to what I had already discovered. But the truth didn't come. She didn't offer it. So, I decided it was time to take control. In the morning, I didn't confront her. I didn't make a scene. I didn't shout or cry. I simply made a decision. I sold the house. I don't mean I decided to move out. I don't mean I packed my bags and found somewhere else to stay. No, I sold the house. I made the choice to cut all ties, to remove myself completely from the life we had shared. It wasn't an emotional reaction, but a quiet, calculated decision. I wasn't going to be a man who begged for the truth. I wasn't going to chase her. I wasn't going to fight for something that wasn't worth fighting for anymore. When she came home that evening, I was already gone. The furniture was gone. The walls were bare. The place we had lived in for years was now empty, just a house with echoes of a life that no longer existed. She texted me that night. She asked where I was, why I wasn't answering her calls. I didn't respond. I didn't owe her an explanation. I moved, quietly, without any grand statement or dramatic exit. I found a new place, somewhere far away, where no one knew me. I didn't tell her where I was going. I didn't need to. And that was how it ended. Not with a fight. Not with anger or resentment. But with quiet distance. A slow unraveling of everything I thought I knew. A soft shift that happened without warning, until it was too late. And as I sit here now, in a new place, a new life, I don't know what happened between us. Maybe I'll never fully understand it. But one thing's for sure. Sometimes, the quietest decisions leave the deepest scars. The house felt empty, even when it was full. Lena had always been good at filling the space with her presence, with her voice. But now, every room seemed to echo back at me in a way that made me feel smaller. The silence in the house, the kind that shouldn't exist in a home that was supposed to be full of life, was deafening. It wasn't just her absence that stung. It was the realization that something had gone wrong long before I even noticed. The night she came home late, I waited, watching the clock tick by, each minute dragging on. She had stayed longer than usual with Victor, her study partner, and that was the first sign. It wasn't the time that bothered me. It was the lack of urgency when she came back. She wasn't in a rush to explain, to show that she was tired or stressed. She just walked in like it was another ordinary night. When she kissed me on the cheek, there was a hesitation, a distance in the way her lips touched my skin. I told myself I was imagining things. People change, I thought. Maybe it was just the stress of her course. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I couldn't sleep that night. It wasn't just the uncertainty that gnawed at me. It was the feeling that I was no longer a part of her world. She had always been my priority, and I had thought she was mine. But now I was standing on the outside, looking in, seeing glimpses of a life she was leading without me. A life that wasn't about us. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was right in front of me. Lena's texts, the way she talked about Victor, there was something more there than just academic collaboration. And if I was being honest with myself, I knew it. I could feel it in my bones. But I wasn't ready to confront her yet. I wasn't sure what I would do when I had all the answers. I spent the next few days watching her. It felt strange, almost like I was stalking her, but I couldn't help myself. I had to know what was really going on. And then, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A simple gesture, a small thing that I didn't expect to see. Lena, smiling at her phone, texting Victor, something I couldn't read clearly from across the room, but enough to make my heart skip a beat. In that moment, I realized what had been building for months, something more than just a friendship or a study session. There was an intimacy to their exchange, something that didn't belong in my world, something that shouldn't have been there at all. I didn't say anything. I didn't ask her about it, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. The doubt had taken root, and now it was all I could think about. Every word, every glance, every late-night study session felt like a thread pulling us further apart. By the time Lena came back that evening, I had already made up my mind. I didn't need to confront her. I didn't need to demand the truth from her. I had seen enough. There was no point in pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. I just needed to figure out what I was going to do next. And that's when I decided I would do something she wouldn't expect. Something that would shake everything to its core. I would take back control of my life. Quietly, without any drama. The next few days were an exercise in restraint. I barely spoke to Lena. I didn't want to hear her explanations or her half-hearted apologies. In some twisted way, I was already done with her, though I hadn't said it aloud. It was the kind of thing that eats at you, like a slow burn inside. The love we once had felt like it was dying, quietly and without fanfare. I spent my days pretending nothing had changed, but inside, I was unraveling. Every time she left for another study session with Victor, every time she texted him in the middle of dinner, I felt my patience and composure slowly fray. But I didn't show it. I couldn't. I knew if I let myself act on impulse, I would regret it. So instead, I started planning. Quietly. Methodically. I had to move out. But not just move out in the way you'd expect. I wanted to erase everything. Start fresh, without a single trace of her. I knew it would be impossible to just walk away and leave the house as if it were still a home for us. The house wasn't just a building. It was a symbol. It was everything we'd built together, everything I thought we had. And if I was going to leave, I was going to leave with nothing but the clothes on my back and the money in my bank account. The house was the first thing I sold. It didn't take long. I wasn't trying to get a fortune for it. I didn't care about the money. I just needed it gone. The property, the memories, the past, gone. The moment it was signed over, I knew I had taken the first step toward liberation. It felt freeing, even though I had no idea where I would go next. Lena didn't notice at first. She didn't ask questions when I began packing my things in silence. I could hear her moving about the house, the soft sound of her laughter as she texted Victor. She didn't realize yet that I had already made up my mind. She wouldn't see the signs until it was too late. A week later, I'd packed everything I could. It wasn't a lot. Most of what I owned were things that didn't hold any emotional weight anymore. The rest, I left behind for her to deal with. A small part of me wanted to leave her with nothing, but I knew that wouldn't bring me peace. It wasn't revenge I was after. I wasn't trying to punish her. No, it was just about leaving. Quietly, decisively, without any drama. I moved into a new place on the other side of town, somewhere Lena wouldn't think to look for me. I didn't want to be close to her anymore. I didn't want to risk seeing her face, hearing her voice. Not yet. Maybe not ever. It wasn't an angry decision. It was a careful one. A choice I made because I knew that if I didn't remove myself completely, I would always wonder what would have happened if I didn't. There would always be a part of me tied to the past, to her. And I couldn't allow that. The hardest part was waiting for her to realize what had happened. I didn't call. I didn't send a text. I didn't leave a note. I just let it sit there, silently, almost cruelly. I wanted her to feel the void. I wanted her to understand that I was gone, and I wasn't coming back. I didn't know how she'd react. Maybe she'd be furious. Maybe she'd feel relief. But whatever she felt, I knew it would be too late. Then, for days after I moved out, she called. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The message she left was simple. Oliver, where are you? What's going on? It felt almost like a cry for help, like she was trying to convince me to come back, to fill the emptiness I left behind. I could have picked up the phone, confronted her, asked her for the truth, but I didn't. I had already figured it out. I already knew what I needed to know, and nothing she could say would change that. I let it ring. The emptiness I felt when I listened to her voicemail wasn't as painful as I expected. In fact, it felt freeing. It felt like the last piece of the puzzle was in place, and now, there was nothing left to hold me back. I wasn't going to be a man who lived in the past, who clung to something that was no longer there. I wasn't angry, but I was done. And that's when I realized that this wasn't just about Lena. It was about me. About finding myself again. About reclaiming a life that wasn't defined by someone else's choices. It was about stepping into the unknown, without fear. I had already begun building my new life, one small step at a time. And the first thing I knew for sure was that I wasn't going to let anyone hold me back. It had been a few days since I moved out. The silence was louder than I thought. My new apartment was small, just enough space for me to breathe. I had everything I needed, a bed, a desk, a place to sit and think. The world outside felt foreign, but at least it was mine. Every time I turned on the TV, I kept expecting to see her name flash on my phone. Some desperate message asking for forgiveness, or maybe a "we need to talk" kind of text. But nothing came. The only messages I had were from work, my old friends checking in, and the occasional spam. But not a word from Lena. At first, I tried not to overthink it. Maybe she was giving me space. Maybe she was too embarrassed to face me. But then I started to wonder, did she even care? Was I just an afterthought in her life? I never imagined it would be this easy for her to let go. I couldn't help but think back to that night. The night when she'd come home late, when she kissed me like everything was fine. The way she pretended nothing had changed, when everything had already shifted beneath the surface. Had she planned it? Was this something she had been building up to for months? Or was I just the fool who didn't see the signs? The more I thought about it, the more I realized how little I knew about her life outside of what she allowed me to see. All those nights she came home late, talking about study sessions, about Victor. I thought I was being supportive, giving her the space she needed. But maybe I was just a fool, too wrapped up in my own routine to notice she was slipping away. I had thought I knew her better than anyone. But in reality, I didn't know her at all. I started questioning everything. Had she been hiding other things from me? How many other parts of our life had been a facade, a lie? It wasn't just the affair that stung. It was the realization that I had been living in a false sense of security. Trust, I realized, isn't built on just love, it's built on honesty. And when that's gone, everything falls apart. One evening, while I was sitting alone, I found myself staring at the empty space around me. I hadn't realized how much of my identity had been tied to that house, to Lena. The person I had been before, the one who wasn't questioning everything, felt so far removed from the person I was now. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't let this feeling of emptiness consume me. The anger, the betrayal, all of it, it was suffocating. I needed to take action. I needed to regain control over my life, not just by leaving her, but by forcing myself to move forward. The problem was, I wasn't sure how to begin. I hadn't heard from Lena in a week. No texts, no calls, not even a simple, "I'm sorry," or "Can we talk?" I had expected her to reach out, to apologize, to try to fix things. But nothing came. Was she really so cold? Or was she just so absorbed in her own world with Victor that she didn't even think to contact me? I started to wonder if maybe this was the universe's way of telling me something I wasn't ready to hear. Maybe this was my chance to fully step into a new life. To forget her, to forget everything. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this. More that I hadn't seen. And as much as I wanted to turn the page and never look back, a part of me still wanted closure. I wanted to know what had really happened. I wanted to know if the person I loved was still in there somewhere, or if she had already moved on to something else. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for her to call me. If she wanted answers, she would have to find me. That night, I decided to check the one thing I hadn't dared to touch, the bank account. Something told me that if I looked there, I'd find the answers I was missing. And when I opened it, my stomach dropped. There, in black and white, was a transfer. A large sum of money had been moved into an account. But it wasn't mine. It was hers, Lena's. And the account it came from? The one I didn't recognize? Victor's. The pieces of the puzzle started falling into place. She wasn't just seeing him. She was invested. Emotionally. Financially. She had made her choice. My gut twisted, but part of me wasn't surprised. I had suspected it, even though I tried to bury that suspicion. I stared at the numbers on the screen, trying to make sense of it. Why had she kept this from me? Why hadn't she just been honest? But the truth was clear now. This wasn't just a study session. This wasn't just some fling. She had been planning this for a while, and I had been too blind to see it. I closed the screen, taking a deep breath. It was over. It had been over for longer than I'd admitted to myself. Now, I was just waiting for the final piece of the puzzle to fall into place. The moment when she would finally realize I was gone, when she would have to face the fact that there was no going back. And when that moment came, I wouldn't be there to pick up the pieces. I was done being the fool. I had already walked away. The only thing left to do now was make sure she knew that. The days dragged on, each one blurring into the next. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for anymore. Closure? An apology? Part of me wanted to hear from Lena, to hear her side of the story, but another part of me knew that nothing she could say would change what had already been done, what I had already seen. I spent my days settling into my new routine. The apartment was quiet, but in a way, that was a relief. No more pretending, no more walking around on eggshells, wondering if I was the only one holding this relationship together. No more wondering if I was the fool. Then, a week after the transfer I had seen in the bank statement, Lena finally reached out. It wasn't a phone call, not a text. It was a simple letter. She sent it to the address I had kept on file for things like bills. She had no way of knowing I'd moved. It was postmarked from the city, and when I saw it sitting on my kitchen counter, something inside me snapped. I had already made my decision. I wasn't going to read it. But I did. The letter started with an apology, a vague one at that. She talked about how she'd made a mistake, how she'd lost her way, and how she regretted the distance that had grown between us. She talked about Victor, but she never actually said what I already knew. No, instead she tried to paint it as if it were an accident, something that just happened. But here's the thing. I wasn't an idiot. I wasn't a man to sit around and be manipulated by empty words anymore. I read her letter carefully, but not to find answers. No, I read it to understand just how far gone she was, just how much of what we had was a lie. As I sat there, reading her words, one thing became clear to me. Lena wasn't just apologizing. She was asking for me to come back. She was telling me that it wasn't too late, that we could fix it. And I realized that in her mind, I was still an option. She was still hoping I would forgive her. But I couldn't. I couldn't forgive her for thinking that she could erase everything we'd built with a few well-chosen lines. I folded the letter and threw it in the trash. I wasn't going to be her safety net anymore. Not when she'd already made her choice. Not when I had seen everything I needed to see. A few days later, she showed up at my door. I knew it was coming, but when I opened the door and saw her standing there, face pale, eyes wide with uncertainty, it was almost too much to take. She tried to speak, but I didn't let her. I don't want to hear it, I said, my voice low but firm. Her face shifted, a mixture of shock and desperation. Oliver, please. I need you to listen. But I couldn't. I couldn't listen to her beg for forgiveness when the trust had been shattered beyond repair. You've made your choice, I said. And now I've made mine. She stood there for a moment, caught between anger and hurt. I could see the tears in her eyes, but I didn't flinch. I had cried enough. You don't understand, she whispered. It wasn't supposed to be this way. I never meant for it to hurt you. But I knew. I knew all too well. I took a deep breath and stepped back, closing the door softly behind me. I didn't need to say another word. I didn't need to explain myself. The truth was already in the air between us, thick and undeniable. She had chosen him, and I had chosen to walk away. I didn't feel relief right away. At first, it was just numbness. But with each passing hour, the weight of what I'd done, the weight of finally putting myself first, started to sink in. It wasn't easy, but I wasn't the man I used to be. And when I walked away from that door, I felt the first flicker of freedom I had in months. I wasn't looking back anymore. The days after that encounter felt like a blur. Lena's face stayed with me for days. Her expression, a mix of confusion and desperation. I kept replaying the moment in my head, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But it was hard to think clearly when my mind was constantly fighting against itself. A part of me still wanted to hold on to what we had, to fight for what we once shared. But the other part, the part that had been quiet for so long, had finally spoken up. And it was telling me, enough. I didn't hear from her for a few weeks after that. I thought that would bring me peace, but it didn't. Instead, I felt an odd emptiness. It wasn't just loneliness. It was a sense of something missing, something I couldn't quite place. My new apartment was becoming familiar. It was small, but it was mine. I found myself walking through the quiet halls late at night, thinking about how I had gotten here, how easily everything could change. One night, as I sat in front of the TV, I checked my phone, out of habit more than anything else. There was a text from an unknown number. I hesitated before opening it. I wasn't sure I wanted to know what it said, but something inside me needed to find out. The message was short, but it cut through me like a knife. I know what you did. You think you're so much better than me, but you're just as broken. At first, I had no idea who it was from. Then, the pieces clicked. It was from Victor. I stared at the screen, reading the words again, trying to make sense of them. Why was he reaching out to me now? What did he want? I wasn't sure what answer I was hoping for, but I wasn't expecting this. I didn't respond immediately. My first instinct was to block the number, but something stopped me. I wanted to understand his side of the story. I wanted to know what he thought he could accomplish by sending me a message like that. The next few minutes felt like hours as I thought about my response. In the end, I decided not to engage. I wasn't going to play his game. This wasn't about proving anything to anyone anymore. It was about moving on, about never looking back. I deleted the message and put my phone down. But the emptiness didn't leave. Not right away. Instead, it lingered, sitting in the back of my mind like a shadow I couldn't escape. There were nights when I would wake up, lying in the dark, wondering if I had made the right choice. Had I really done the right thing by walking away? What if she was truly sorry? What if she really wanted to fix things? But then I remembered the way she had kissed me the night she came home late. The way she had avoided my eyes when I asked her questions. The way she had kept secrets. And I knew, deep down, that there was nothing left to salvage. I had left for a reason. And that reason wasn't going to change. A few more days passed, and I started to settle into my new life, even if the unease still clung to me. I found a rhythm, waking up early, going for runs in the morning, working late into the night. I kept busy, kept moving, kept the thoughts of her and Victor at bay. I was trying to heal, even if I wasn't sure how. Then, the knock on my door came. I wasn't expecting it, But somehow, I knew. I knew it was her. And when I opened the door, there she was. Lena, standing in front of me, with a look of pure vulnerability in her eyes. "I need to talk," she said quietly, her voice trembling. I didn't let her in. I just stood there, looking at her, feeling nothing. I had nothing left to say to her. "You don't get to do this," I told her. "You don't get to come back now and try to fix everything." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't flinch. I had nothing left for her. No sympathy, no desire to understand. I was done. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never meant for it to happen this way. I was wrong. I thought I could balance everything, but I couldn't. I lost myself." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. She reached out, like she wanted to touch me, but I took a step back. "I'm done. You don't get to rewrite the past." And with that, I closed the door. I didn't look back. As I sat down on my couch, I felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't about anger or bitterness anymore. It was just about moving forward. I was no longer tangled in her web of lies and confusion. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. It's strange, the feeling of freedom after being so entangled in someone else's choices. When Lena knocked on my door, I thought I would feel something. Anger, regret, maybe even sadness. But I didn't. I felt nothing but a quiet kind of relief. I'd expected to feel more, but in reality, I felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted off my chest. It wasn't that I was free of her entirely. I knew that wouldn't happen overnight. The years we'd spent together, the memories that still lingered in the corners of my mind, they would take time to fade. But I had made a decision. I had taken control. I wasn't going to be the man she thought I was, the one who would just fall back into her arms because she said the right words. I wasn't going to be the fool who thought things could go back to how they were. When I closed that door on her, I didn't just close it physically. I closed it emotionally, mentally. I told myself that I would never go back to that place again, to that life we had tried to build together. I was done. The days that followed were quiet. I didn't hear from Lena. I didn't hear from Victor either. The silence was suffocating at first, but eventually, it became a comfort. My life had become mine again, no longer tainted by their secrets or the lies they'd woven. I tried to focus on my work, on the small things I could control. I'd gotten used to the emptiness of my apartment, the solitude. At times, it felt like a prison, but other times, it felt like a sanctuary. It was mine. But no matter how many times I tried to keep busy, there were moments when memories would flood back. The sound of her voice, the way she smiled when she came home, the way everything seemed so perfect before I knew. Those moments hit me at odd times, while I was making coffee in the morning, or when I would hear a song that we had once danced to. And that's when I realized the hardest part of walking away wasn't about leaving her. It was about leaving behind the version of myself that I had been while I was with her. The person who trusted, who gave everything without question, without hesitation. That person no longer existed. I couldn't be that man anymore. I spent weeks in a haze, adjusting to this new version of my life. I went on long walks, not because I had nowhere else to go, but because I was trying to piece together the parts of myself that had been lost. I couldn't fix what had been broken, but I could at least start from scratch. Then, one morning, while I was out for a run, I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. Across the street, standing at a cafe, was Lena. She was with Victor. They were laughing, sharing a coffee, completely at ease. It hit me like a punch to the gut. For a second, I stood there, watching them, my heart racing. The anger I thought I had let go of surged back. But it wasn't the anger I was expecting. It wasn't about them being together. It was about the fact that I was no longer part of her life, that I had been replaced so easily. But then, just as quickly as the anger flared, I felt something else, a strange sense of clarity. I wasn't angry at her anymore. I wasn't angry at Victor. I wasn't angry at anything. I turned around and walked away. It was like a switch had flipped. The last tie, the last lingering thread, had snapped. I wasn't part of their world anymore, and I didn't need to be. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. Months passed. Life, as it always does, continued. The anger faded, the heartache dulled, and eventually, I found myself in a place I never thought I would be, at peace. My routine became a comfort. I focused on the things that mattered to me, the things that brought me joy before Lena and before all the complications. I reconnected with old friends, started picking up hobbies I'd neglected, and spent more time alone, learning what it meant to truly be independent again. But there was something else that had been nagging at me, something I hadn't fully addressed yet. It wasn't just the betrayal. It wasn't just the affair. It was the way Lena had walked away from everything we'd built together without a second thought, without remorse. She didn't seem to understand the gravity of what she had done. And that's when the universe decided to step in. It started innocently enough. One afternoon, I received a text from an old colleague, someone I hadn't spoken to in a while. It was a simple message, but what it contained would change everything. "Hey Oliver, I know you're not in the loop anymore, but I thought you'd want to hear this. Heard some crazy stuff about Lena and Victor. Apparently, they're in a bit of trouble. I'm sure it's not the kind of thing you'd want to be involved in, but I figured you should know." At first, I thought it was just gossip. But as I read the message again, something in me clicked. I wasn't just curious, I needed to know. I needed to understand what was going on. It turned out that Lena and Victor's perfect relationship wasn't as smooth as it had seemed. In fact, things had started unraveling. Victor, it seemed, had been dealing with some financial troubles, and Lena had become more involved in his mess than she ever let on. She had gotten caught up in some shady business deals, all to keep up the illusion of their perfect life. The details came in bits and pieces over the next few days, and what I heard made me shake my head in disbelief. Lena had always been the type to act like everything was under control, to project an image of success, but beneath it all, she had been sinking deeper into a world she didn't understand. What happened next was almost poetic. Lena and Victor were caught in a web of lies that finally caught up with them. It wasn't anything dramatic, no sudden explosion or confrontation. Instead, it was a slow burn. Victor's financial troubles became public, and it turned out that Lena's name had been tied to several questionable investments. The authorities got involved. Her business was investigated. The life she'd so carefully built, both her personal and professional life, began to crumble in front of her. I didn't revel in her downfall. I didn't take pleasure in her pain, but I couldn't ignore the fact that she had chosen this path. She had deceived me, manipulated me, and broken every promise we had made to each other. Now, the consequences were hers to face. And as I watched from the sidelines, I realized something. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to get even. Life had already taken care of that for me. I had walked away from the wreckage, rebuilt my life, and moved forward. I had come out on the other side, stronger and wiser. As for Lena, she would have to learn the hard way that life doesn't always hand you a second chance when you burn all your bridges. But me? I had made my peace. I had freed myself from the ties that bound me to her, and in doing so, I had found something far more valuable than any revenge or closure. I had found freedom. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't angry. I was just free. And that, I realized, was the best kind of revenge. Please like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. I read them all.